have to say it. Some of the railway systems were built in order to avoid a military invasion. That is why, for example, we have what we call the normal gauge and the broad gauge. We are still operating on parts of the network in Europe signaling systems that are 100 years old. And this is what you have to overcome. But here it is almost impossible to move even the locomotive from one member state to the other member state or across the borders. So what we are doing in practice is often to change the locomotive, and we are even changing the drivers, because the drivers are only in some rare cases aware of the other signaling system. So we stop at the borders for about half an hour or more. With the Eurostar running from Paris and Brussels to London. I think there can be more. This is my dream. Connecting more cities to the United Kingdom and trying to avoid flights. The first wish is really that everybody is convinced we go for this approach of railways. The second wish would be we overcome national thinking. We really strive towards this European approach. And then the last thing is just let's do it. Let's stop discussing everything. Move on with this. I think we're discussing a little bit too much and we're not implementing enough.
Welcome to the next episode of Beyond the Bubble podcast. Today we have a special guest, a true rail expert, a civil engineer by training, and someone who's dedicated pretty much all of his professional career to regulating, examining, improving rail from so many aspects. And currently he's the Director General of the European Rail Association, which he will explain more in detail where that comes into the broader picture of dealing with trains. And we will talk a little bit about that part, but certainly we will talk a lot about trains in general, as passengers, as business, as freight forwarding, as everything else. And before we get into it, I would like to encourage you to subscribe to the channel and share it with friends and those who are interested. And add comments, add questions. We always welcome those at the team. So with that, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So how would you refine my brief introduction about your background and about what you do and what's your connection to trains?
I would say it was almost perfect. If I just make one little amendment, the association I'm working for is the European Rail Supply Industry. So it is actually the manufacturers producing, maintaining trains, infrastructure and signaling. So it's a very particular segment.
And before we hear about your background, but just let's get that completely clear. So there are many, not just association, but many stakeholders, to use this very policy term, dealing with railway. And of course, I use the word train, which railway sector, railway industry is the broader idea. So help us understand what different cooks are around the dish being trains and the railway sector.
It is indeed a very complex and a very vast landscape, but to simplify it perhaps a little bit, I will speak about the rail operating community on the one hand and the rail supply industry on the other hand. So we are the rail supply industry. We are providing actually all the goods, what I said, trains, infrastructure components and signaling for I call them the other side, for the rail operating community. So the rail operating community is everything what the usual customer sees actually when we talk about railways. It is the trains, it is the infrastructure. And there we have to dive then deeper actually into the setting of this landscape, which becomes very complicated. Everybody knows the former state railway undertakings or companies. This is how most of us grew up actually. Companies state by state, so like SNCF, like Deutsche Bahn, like MAF in Hungary, or like Trenitalia in Italy, and I can endlessly almost continue this list. But then with the different railway packages, this system was split up actually. So they split up in railway operators and they split up in railway infrastructure managers. This was the first big change actually in this landscape. Then this continued actually, so new market entrants came and they are competing actually on the network. So now we have the incumbent railway undertakings, but we have new market entrants operating passenger trains, operating freight trains. And in order to increase the complexity even, we now have lessors and leasers on top. So this is actually a whole organism of actors playing together. We are all in the same technical system, so we are all kind of forced to work with each other, although we all have diverging business interests and ideas. And this is the beauty and the challenge at the same time.
Yeah, we'll come back to that because I think it's fascinating that creating that infrastructure, making it possible for different operators to compete, driving the prices hopefully down for the end customer, but of course making it meaningful as a competition. So there's a lot of interesting business side to it, but very practical side. But just go back to your background and how you landed in this particular job. Can you give us a brief summary?
How I landed in this job, I would say it was pretty clear that I'm going to go to the railways because I was fascinated by railways when I was a very young boy. And I always wanted to go into this railway world, into this railway business. So then I was looking for jobs, actually. What kind of jobs can I do in the railway business? It was admittedly in the 1990s. And then I found railway engineering and civil engineering. And I was looking for a good university, and I think I found a very good university with excellent conditions after the reunification of Germany in the 1990s. So I had excellent conditions.
Where was that, in Köln?
It was in Dresden, actually, in Eastern Germany. And then in the 1990s, it was a bit challenging, actually, to find a job in Eastern Germany because of the economic situation. And then I was offered a job at Deutsche Bahn in Cologne, so I had to move again. And this was the beginning, actually, of my career in the railway world. Yeah. I always wanted to see something outside this Deutsche Bahn bubble. And so I was applying for international positions. I tried with other railway undertakings. And then there was suddenly this great opportunity in Paris at the UIC, the International Railway Association. And then it started. And then I was called to come to Brussels to the European Railway Association, CR. And 2 years ago, actually, the rail supply industry knocked on my door and asked me, would you like to take over the job as Director General of UNIFE? And I was a bit hesitant in the beginning because I spent my entire life in the rail operating community. And I thought, is that the right thing? And so I thought, now you're turning 50, actually. And I really wanted to do a step forward. And so I said yes, and I can tell you it was the right decision, and I'm really happy about this decision I took.
So going back to rails, I mean, it's really a fascinating area and way of transport because it's environmentally friendly, it's fast, it's comfortable, it's got all the good stuff to it. Why is it so difficult to have more infrastructure, have more trains, and really deploy it all over Europe? And Europe is a small continent. It really lends itself to this sort of transport. And yet there are lots of things that probably cause you headache and something you're working on to make the system work better.
It's passion and headache at the same time.
Again, as a very amateur, but a aficionado of trains, you see, why can't I just travel from Brussels to Budapest very easily with a night train or some fast one because of lots of coordination and infrastructure and other challenges. So tell me why the technology is so good and yet so difficult to deploy.
We have to go a little bit back to history, actually, without making this a complete history lesson, of course. Yeah. But we have to go back 200 years ago, actually, and we're celebrating 200 years of railways in Europe this year. It all started in England or in the United Kingdom, and then it came to the continent. And this is actually where it started, because we did not have 200 years ago or 150 years ago a very European approach. We had a very national approach, because railways were built actually with national intentions actually and based on national standards. And the decision taken about 200 years ago is something we are still suffering from today, because we have highly national systems with national requirements, national technical parameters, for example. This is what we are still dealing with. And this is the answer to your question, why is there no train running from Lisbon to Warsaw? Because it's simply technical, very challenging to almost impossible. And it was intentionally as well, we have to say it. Some of the railway systems were built in order to avoid a military invasion. That is why, for example, we have what we call the normal gauge and the broad gauge. Russia, for example, bought and built broad gauge in order not to be invaded. That was the lesson learned from the Napoleonic Wars. Spain did the same thing, actually, not to be invaded by its big neighboring country. These are all elements. But then, of course, there was some, let me say, belief that at national level we are better. I mean, that is very European, so we always do it better than the neighbors. So we implemented different technical systems. We implemented, for example, different electric systems for powering trains. And this is what we have to overcome step by step. But the issue here, and this is my headache as well, my positive headache, or my challenge, we have very long life cycle in the railway system. So we are not talking about a coffee machine. We're not talking about a mobile phone. We're talking about infrastructure and rolling stock, which lasts very, very long. Yeah. If you go out there, you see infrastructure that is 150 years old. You see trains. You see this in Germany. You see this in Poland, in Hungary. Trains being 20, 30 years old. So to change it, to do this migration, is very challenging, it's very expensive, but it's very long-lasting as well. And this is actually why, let me say, the rollout of the European network as a real European network being interoperable is very challenging and very long-lasting.
Is that mostly because of the tracks? Is it the electric system? Is it the trains themselves? So which part is the greatest, say, challenge from an interoperability standpoint?
We were so European, and everybody is different in this respect. And this is the big challenge. It's everything. It is all the systems. The infrastructure is different. The electricity supply is different. Even the signaling systems are different. And that is a huge challenge. And this is, for example...
Is it like the physical signaling system or the digital coordination part?
We are still talking a lot about physical signaling systems, and we are still operating on parts of the network in Europe, signaling systems that are 100 years old.
Whoa.
And this is what you have to overcome.
And upgrade.
So there is, let me say, from two levels or from two sources, there will be a lot of money coming in, the EU budget, but from the member states as well. And this is quite a lot. So there's huge potential.
Yeah. And what is it mostly spent on? So is it truly laying the tracks? Is it changing systems, upgrading essentially the infrastructure you mentioned? Or is it to a large degree a regulatory challenge? So is it like the different rules and legislation that needs to be reconciled, or actually things need to be built, replaced for it to work?
It is actually both. If we start with the infrastructure, there are a couple of bottlenecks that need to be removed actually, because you see already now in civilian use, we come to certain limits in our network. So trains are running late because of certain bottlenecks. If you now want to add military mobility on top, it's going to be very challenging. So you need to remove these bottlenecks. One of the big bottlenecks is actually, an obstacle is the signaling system, because we do not have a completely and broadly rolled out European signaling system. As I said, member state by member state, everybody has their own signaling system.
Can you say more about it? Like for the average viewer, and I kind of count myself as such, signaling systems is the the little light that shows the train which way to go, it doesn't sound that complicated. So why is it still that difficult?
We made it complicated. And when you compare it, for example, to the road sector, I mean, you have traffic lights that are identical throughout Europe, I would even say throughout the world. And you have road signs, actually, that are identical throughout the European continent. So you can go everywhere in Europe and you will understand, actually, that a red signal is a red signal. You're supposed to stop, and green means you can go. And then there are speed restrictions, for example. This is every driver knows.
Yeah.
We don't have this in the railway system. We invented everything. So a colorful light can have a different meaning, for example, except red, for example. But other lights can have a different meaning. The signaling, so the signs next to the track can have a different meaning. The communication between these signals and the locomotive is a different one because we have developed it differently.
So how can a train driver from France who goes into Germany or say Spain, if there's or you take a Eurostar or something that runs through multiple countries. So the driver has to know all the different signals.
Exactly.
Now I pass the border. Now it's a totally different signal system.
Exactly. That's what the driver has to know. He has to know the different signaling system. He has to know the different operational rules. But you took out the best example, actually, with Eurostar, for example. But most of the examples are freight trains that are less fancy and often less in the press. But here it is almost impossible to move even the locomotive from one member state to the other member state or across the border. So what we are doing in practice is often to change the locomotive, and we are even changing the drivers, because the drivers are only in some rare cases aware of the other signaling system and of the other operational rules. So this is what we have been doing in Europe for over a century, actually. So we change locomotives, we change drivers, we stop at the borders for about half an hour or more.
Hang on a second. So a locomotive is the driving engine, right? But the freight itself remains the same.
Remains the
just
same.
The driving engine, the lead one or whatever I would call it, is being replaced along with the driver because of the incompatibility of the system.
Exactly.
Oh, come on.
That's what we do. That's what we do every day, every night, and it takes us very, very long. Together with other operational procedures, it can take hours that a train is passing a border. This is why trains are queuing up at the borders, whereas the lorries, they just run through.
This is behind the scenes to those who are not in the sector, not in the freight or logistics or even the passenger or tourism sector, and this doesn't make any sense. And I guess it runs to the degree of tens of thousands of trains and locomotives needing every single day, the minute they cross certain borders.
Exactly.
And so what's the solution to this? Is it better, more standardized systems? Or again, is it a technical, a pure, physical change in the infrastructure?
It is both, actually. We want to have harmonized systems. So, for example, for the signaling system, would be the single European traffic management system. That is ERTMS. That's what we call it. Yeah. So it is a single approach to signaling in Europe. And that would allow then trains to cross the border.
Yeah.
But it's even a bit more, because it means that we are harmonizing the operational rules on both sides of the borders. Again, the road sector. When you have certain traffic rules, they normally apply on both sides of the borders. And it's very clear for you as a driver when you go from Germany to Poland or you go from Italy to Slovenia that the rules are similar and you have a good understanding of these rules.
Yeah.
We don't have this in the railway sector because that varies from network to network. And this is what we need to harmonize, actually, allowing trains and the staff to travel across borders.
And what holds it back? Is it national pride? Is it one member state saying, hey, my system is better than yours, so I want this to be the gold standard and not yours? So is there this kind of competition between the different countries to say which standard should prevail? Or is there some other factor there?
Tricky question. But
yes, and I know in your position you need to be careful with your words, which is fair enough. Yeah.
The answer is yes. And I mean, I'm an engineer, I'm a railway engineer myself. So yes, we have our national pride. We think we did it best. And we just developed at national level. But now we came to a point where we see, no, this was a wrong development, because this is a dead end, actually. So we are not interchangeable, we are not interoperable, and this is what we have to break now.
Yeah.
So we have to break the silos, actually, between member states. And as I said, if we continue like this, we will never make it. So we have to open up, push the national pride, the engineer's pride aside, which is a challenge, I can tell you. But otherwise, we will never move towards, say, a single European railway area.
And where is more motivation to do so? I'm kind of thinking out loud in, let's say, with the common sense logic, that small member states might be more inclined to doing this because they want to go international, because you very quickly leave your country. You take Luxembourg, and I recall that once while I was driving, not taking a train, but I took a wrong turn, and next thing I know, I'm in France. So small countries would certainly have that incentive to say, well, we do want to operate internationally, so we are absolutely into harmonizing. And larger countries, you take Germany, France, Spain, or Italy for that matter, or Poland, I would guess maybe less inclined because they have a very robust domestic market. Is that a good logic, or the reality is different?
Perfect summary of it. And when you have a look, for example, at the rollout of the European signaling system, where it happened or where it was completed, it's exactly these smaller member states, with the greatest respect, of course, for them. But they did an amazing job. Look at Belgium. They're going to complete it actually this year, pretty soon, in a couple of days. Luxembourg and the Czech Republic. So
Right.
because they know it's going to be impossible, they have a lot of neighbors around them or surrounding them. So having all these different national systems on board of a locomotive is almost impossible, and it's very expensive. So they really understood it. But now the big member states need to follow as well. For example, Germany being a transit country. And here I really hope that military mobility will bring this push. In particular, when Germany becomes, or is perhaps already, I need to be careful, a hub for military mobility in Europe, because it has a very central position.
Yeah, and that's such a delicate question, right? Because Germany, with its history and everything, and of course the development of of train and rail infrastructure in the 1930s was very important factor in all the military aspects. So how it's a delicate question, right? Of how does Germany's role play into this? Is Germany, let's say, has a politically sensitive or difficult position when it speaks up, or less so anymore?
Fortunately, I would say Germany is pushing very much this military mobility as well, and the interoperability, at least in theory. I would love to see my own country implementing a little bit more of the European approach, in particular the European signaling system. I would love to see this country being a front runner for that, because it is a transit country. And I think now we have to work the switches for the future in Germany for European mobility. It's not only military mobility, it is high speed as well. And there I would like to see my country going a bit faster.
Yeah. And let me ask you about maybe two interesting country from this perspective of our conversation. One is the UK and the other one is Turkey, because neither is an EU member state and both have very, well, let's say, unique relations with the EU in so many ways. So how do they come into the European rail and general logistical scene in that regard?
I mean, in terms of the regulatory framework, they're very closely connected to the European Union. The UK has been a member of the Union for many years, so they have developed the same framework. They still apply it. But we have another association, actually, or a grouping, I would say. It is OTIF. It is the grouping for railways, in simple words, for international cooperation. And here, for many years and decades, actually, successfully, they have developed a common framework how to operate trains, how to build trains, actually, and they have laid a common foundation for a European railway network. The UK is linked to it, Turkey is linked to it. So they are really into this European network. And although we had Brexit and although Turkey is not a member of the European Union, they are very closely linked to us in terms of railway and railway operation.
And there are connected systems. And I don't know whether as a passenger I could go to Istanbul, for that matter, by train from here. I mean, I probably need to change quite a few times, and it wouldn't be fast, but it's still linked into the European system, I assume.
It is linked to the European system. I mean, the UK, I think, is the best example with the Eurostar running from Paris and Brussels to London. I think there can be more. This is my dream, connecting more cities to the United Kingdom and trying to avoid flights. With Turkey, I think this is something to be built up, but let's remember there was once an amazing connection from Western and continental Europe, a direct connection from Paris to Istanbul, and it was the legendary Orient Express. Yeah. Regrettably, in this perspective, we made a step back. So now we have to think how we can push this forward, how we can bring railways into the 21st century, perhaps not reviving the Orient Express, but reviving the idea actually of connecting European capitals. Therefore, the Commission brought up its high-speed plan.
European Commission, yeah.
Exactly. And I think this is a good foundation actually for going or for driving towards a real interconnected Europe by rail.
Could we say, or can we say, that trains and transport through train has become more, well, popular, but probably because it's just more economical or more scalable? Or is road still the one that's the primary way of moving things around?
I mean, when you see the modal share, the answer is regrettably yes. Let me say the bulk is still moved on road. But we see that with this next generation coming in,
next generation trains?
Of people,
Okay.
people, the young generation,
Okay.
I would say now.
Not of trains, but of people.
Yeah, exactly. Now I have to admit that this is the young generation. I turned 50 already, so I'm not the young generation anymore. We see that there is a shift going on now. So they're moving away from cars, from possessing a car, but really to public transport, and it becomes more and more popular. This is a very nice trend. What I like to see is that night trains are becoming popular for the young generation as well. For the freight business, it's still very challenging. So they are really struggling, and I really want to see a political push as well for freight business, that we'll have a real shift from road to rail, because we cannot simply, if the freight business is increasing with all the parcels we ship, we cannot build more roads and more motorways. That's impossible. But we need to use rail for that. And that's my dream and that's my wish.
I mean, it sounds so scalable. And as long as, with all those technical and other challenges we spoke about, but as long as those are improved and taken care of, this is the way to go. And I guess there's a certain distance or certain type of things which make it absolutely worthwhile, because maybe not for a couple 100 kilometers, but when we talk 1,000, 2,000 or even longer distances, you ship the Spanish tomatoes and whatever produces, or machinery or what have you, to even to Germany, but even Eastern Europe. It probably makes the most sense to do it through these means.
Indeed, and I would love to see this even more, but therefore we need a strong political will, and it must be a continuous way of working and implementing. I mean, coming from Germany, we put, after the war, a lot of emphasis on the car industry and on building roads and motorways, Autobahn. And regrettably, I would say until the 1990s, with some few exemptions, they neglected the railway system. And I think this is now we pay the price for it, actually. And this is, we need to shift this, actually. We need to rethink how transportation is going to happen in the future. And I would really like to see the tomatoes from Spain to Poland or to Germany being shipped by rail. People traveling to their holiday destinations by train. And I would even go one step further. I would like to see that the first choice is actually the train. So you're not going on a platform where you find cheap flights. No, you go on a platform and check what is the most suitable and comfortable railway connection. That is the mindset I would like to.
Yeah, and talking about those platforms, have you bring it up because I know some, two or three, that do that sort of thing. Essentially, you just like you would buy an airplane or the platforms that aggregate multiple sources, and now you have that for rail. But the ones I tried, at least quite recently, they are not great, and it wasn't always obvious, especially for larger distances. So I take a personal example that we're going with the family to Austria in a couple of months, and I was hoping that we're going to take a train from Brussels, and that's easy. It was not easy and not obvious in any way. And I don't think that's a particularly complicated case to go from Belgium essentially through Germany and then Austria. I mean, it's literally next door in that sense, but still ultimately ended up buying a flight ticket because it was just more straightforward and easier. So those sort of frustrations, I think, hold a lot of people back from traveling larger distances, let alone the speed. But if you're okay with that, or there's a bit of romanticism around doing a night train, or for the very fact of traveling on train and the experience of it, so there are those benefits, especially when you're not too pressed on time. But still, I don't think that there's a real proper service or market out there to help the customers make that choice.
There is definitely room for improvement. There is always room for improvement. But I can tell you, I'm the lucky one that I work for the rail supply industry, and I do not have to dive in the topics of ticket vending and of ticketing or marketing. This is something we leave in the good hands of the rail operating community.
That's your previous hat. Your
exactly.
Old hat.
Yeah. The rail supply industry is not in this business of ticket vending. We just provide actually the means to carry out the transport.
Yeah, but if I still press you on that, and again, not in your current role, but your work history, and you had quite a bit of exposure there. So what could be done to improve that situation? Because I think a lot depends on the ease from a customer side. If it's easy to do, people are much more likely going to do that. And the ease is, again, not so much on traveling by train, but just simply finding out my options, buying a ticket, and then they will do it. But if at the very first hurdle I'm blocked or it's complicated, chances are I will give it up.
As I said, I think there is still potential for improvement, but I would really leave this as well in the hands of the operators, because it is their business actually. And I would like to see actually the actors of the railway sector to shape their own business and not have any outside input or someone to teach us or to tell us how we are supposed to run our business. I think this is a little bit of a learning exercise we have to do as well collectively.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately the very fact of the interconnectedness. And again, we're no longer talking individual countries. Like you said, back 200 years ago, everybody looked at their own country given the state of the world at the time. But it's just so much more interconnected and so many more, well, people, but also products traveling all over Europe. Let me ask a slightly different question. I'm pretty curious about innovation in your sector and hear more about fast trains, super fast trains, the TGVs, the Shinkansen of Europe. Where is that going? How is that? What does it look like on our continent?
I mean, we are a very innovative sector. This is what I can proudly say. I'm really proud of it. And what I'm even more proud of is that we are world market leader. So I think we are one of the few sectors actually where we are still leader with technology. But this
As in globally?
Seeing globally, indeed. And this is why I'm very proud, honestly. This is why this job is so much fun, I can tell you. Because you can proudly come and say, hey, listen, guys, we are world market leader and we want to remain world market leader. But there are two aspects, actually, and this is what we have to focus on. The first one is our quality. So this is a continuous improvement of our quality. And the second one is the innovation and the research you just mentioned. And this is one of our competitive advantages, that we are very innovative. Actually, we push it forward. We need to continuously improve, to invest in research and innovation. This is what we have been doing. But the important thing is we need to further connect research and innovation with the deployment, so with the actual rollout strategy. So sometimes we had some fancy products developed by some engineers, and this is the engineer way of thinking. I want to have something nice, something fancy, something innovative. But then the engineer does not necessarily think about the implementation, and the engineer does not necessarily think about the costs and the deployment and the migration. That's not what we learn at the university. This needs to change, actually. Engineers need to think about finance and funding, about implementation as well. This is the way forward. This is what we need to link.
Can you think of an innovation that you think is amazing, but it's just very hard to make it a reality?
ERTMS.
Okay.
We have invented a European rail traffic management system, and we have been deploying it for 3 decades.
Okay.
And we are still not there. So there we have to say, okay, this was perhaps a little bit over-engineered. And now we have to see how can we deploy it, looking at cost, bringing costs down, simplifying the system perhaps, without any negative impact on safety, of course. But this is something where, let me say, the engineering world needs to work closely together with those who do the financing and funding and the operational people. So this is really, again, breaking the silos, bringing people together. And I think I can say it because I'm an engineer by heart as well. And I know how we think, and that we often exclude certain areas which are quite essential actually for making the deployment successful.
Yeah, I think it's a very common issue in all sectors and in all industries. I mean, even in small businesses, you can come up with an amazing innovation that even you can create a nice prototype, you build it, it looks great, all very good. But then making it a reality is a whole different thing. There are commercial considerations, the regulatory part, the uptake. Maybe you come up with the best innovation in the world and the clients hate it, right? Like, so there's also that problem where it looks perfect on the design board, but the uptake is it's not ready for the audience is not ready to receive it yet, right? So I think you mentioned with this the traffic management system, and it's in 3 decades in the making. Whoa. And when are we going to have, in your view, more speed trains, fast trains? Because that definitely possible, and we are seeing all these examples, and even with the TGV and the others are there, but it's not as widespread as one might assume, especially when you go out of France. Well, in Spain, you have amazing Renfe trains and France and a couple of countries in the world, but not that many. Is that an infrastructure problem, or why isn't, or is just not worth it commercially to deploy those?
I think you can't easily answer this question, but you always have to take into account that deploying high speed is very expensive, and it takes actually years, or it takes decades, at least in Europe. So this is something that needs to be carefully considered. The planning takes quite long. The financing and funding is an important aspect. High speed comes at a certain cost, actually, and it needs a sound planning, and it needs a continuous commitment, actually, to roll this out. So when a government, for example, changes, then you need to continue the rollout. And I think you are almost aware of the example I'm going to bring now. It's the example from my own country. It is connecting Munich to Berlin, where I think this project took us almost 3 decades after the reunification of the countries because of governments changing. Then they stopped the project, then they continued the project. This is not how we can work. I mean, we really need a continuous rollout. I'm happy that the European Commission put now forward or roll out this high-speed plan. That's a strategic thinking. Now we have to think about how to pay for it, and we need to think about the industrial capacity as well. Because you cannot just roll out a high-speed network within 10 years. You need capacity on all sides. The construction industry, the rail supply industry, it's huge, let me say, elements that are needed for it. A good example is Rail Baltica. We're not, and this is what I always say, we're not talking about building mobile phones or Barbie dolls. We are talking about huge investments, about huge infrastructure projects, not only in terms of money, but in terms of the quantity and quality of the products to be delivered. And that's a challenge, and that is quite long-lasting, actually.
Yeah, and it's, it makes so much sense. But it really, it's entirely clear from everything we discussed so far is that rail is a unique animal in all of this, because it's got this enormous benefits, and at the same time it's just such a heavy lift to get it started, much heavier than road. I mean, you can drill through mountains to build roads, and yet the train will be a whole different animal because of all its needs and the weight and the systems around it and the interoperability. So if you were faced with, let's say, a lobbyist or someone who speaks for the aviation industry and someone who speaks for the road transport industry, what would be your pitch? Why choose rail instead of investing in one or the other?
I mean, for me, it is mostly the sustainability aspect, actually. And I think this is our greatest advantage, actually, because we are a very sustainable system. And this is not only in terms of, let me say, the environmental aspects, but it is in terms of the reliability as well. Of course, I agree, the system is not perfect. But you see, for example, when we had this volcano outbreak a couple of years ago.
In Iceland, right?
In Iceland, exactly. Well, I can't pronounce this name of this.
Oh yeah, no one
famous
can.
Infamous.
Maybe
Icelanders
you
can. Go for it. You go for it. I find it so. We call it the volcano in Iceland.
Right.
The aviation sector came to a standstill. We were still running actually across Europe. The safety aspect for me is a very important aspect. For example, when we see the road fatalities compared to the safety level of the European railway system, so I think that we have a huge advantage, and I would just cluster this under sustainability. So, this is why I've been working in this sector for 25 years. I'm very proud of what I'm doing, and I fully stand behind it because I really believe in this system.
Yeah, that makes sense. How about going back to the innovation part and digital? So self-driving trains, is that a thing? Or let's say driverless? I think probably that's a better word because, well, trains have a fixed track, but driverless trains operating safely. Where does that stand today?
We are, I would say, in the middle of it, where you see it already in urban rail, for example, in closed systems, metro systems. Paris, for example, is a good example.
Airports, that kind of thing.
Indeed, airports, well, I think it was even the first one. So it works, of course, we have to see that these are closed systems, actually. So this is running on a line, actually, with a harmonized infrastructure as well. So, of course, now when you put it at system level, at European system level, where you have different actors, actually, where you have different technical systems, it becomes a bit more complicated, or slightly, or even rather complicated. But nonetheless, we are working on this. There is some promising progress, I would say. And in the light of the ERTMS rollout, actually, the automated train operation is something we push forward.
Yeah, as I look at it again from the outside, I think it's more the safety aspect that matters. I guess it's more assisting the drivers and avoiding problems, or actually helping them translate, so to say, the different signals and all the many things they need to pay attention to, rather than kind of replacing them, because I guess that's such a fractional small part of the overall cost of operating a train that there's probably not so much interest in that. It's more about the safety and reliability aspect, where IT systems or digital things can help them. Is that a correct assumption?
That's correct. So we have different grades of automation. We call it GOA. We have an acronym for everything in this sector. We were currently discussing about 4 grades of automation from 1 to 4. And as you said, this is supporting the driver, giving advice to the driver, and it can then go up to completely replacing the human element on the train. But at the moment, we believe in the driver as well. And we believe in the driver being supported to enhance or the level of safety, actually. And this is quite, let me say, quite forward-looking, and I think it's very promising.
Yeah, yeah. And going back again to the European, the train, the manufacturers and generally the sectors, I mean, not just the trains themselves, but the systems around it that you're dealing with. Which countries in the world are developing their train infrastructure currently? I mean, which countries pay so much attention, well, money ultimately, but attention and political importance to developing their train systems? I would guess China probably is among them. The Japanese train sector, I think, is significant, though I don't know how much European products they would buy. Again, these are just my assumptions, but I'm curious about it. And then there's the U.S., where it's vast, but train travel doesn't have a very good reputation, and it's not as advanced as the European ones. So I'm just curious about if we take a global look at that.
I hope I don't disappoint you now with my answer, because I'm going to give you a completely different answer.
Okay.
And
I have no expectations. It's curiosity that's driving me.
We're very active at the moment in the activity of the European Commission. It is DG INPA, and the
international partnerships. Yeah.
Exactly, and the initiative is called Global Gateway. It is an initiative actually to bring European industry abroad. And to help European industry to get the foot in the door in these countries. And we have a couple of focus areas, actually, we are dealing with. And the first region is the region you haven't mentioned. It's Latin America and Caribbean, where we are very active. The second one is Asia, actually, with Central Asia. And the third one is Africa, so the southern part of Africa. The first one, Latin America and Caribbean, is something where we see great potentials, actually. We have put a lot of focus, or we started actually putting our focus on Mexico. And here again, we would like to see the rollout of the European Rail Signaling System, ERTMS. As the second step, we focus on Costa Rica and Panama. And this is so interesting because we are telling them right now, do not repeat the mistakes we did as the Europeans. We say, think big, think in terms of interoperability, and think already today of one day connecting your network to your neighboring countries when you talk about Mexico, Costa Rica, and Panama.
Costa Rica badly needs train. I was there a year ago, and the roads are not easy to drive on.
And this is what they want to improve.
Given their geography. Right?
Yeah, and this is what they want to improve. But we said as well, do not repeat what, and we discussed it earlier today.
Yeah.
Do not start at a national approach so that your engineers starting competing technical system. No, agree with your neighbors already at the very beginning on a single set of requirements, on a single train. Look at what the Europeans have done and go for this European harmonized approach. The second one is Southern Africa, which I come back to my history in Cape Town. In the beginning, they were not very much in favor of ERTMS because they have regarded this as too expensive. But South Africa, for example, is facing a lot of cable theft, which is needed for traditional national, we call them Class B systems, national signaling systems. Mm-hmm. And ERTMS is actually a system that can reduce the physical cables because it's a different technical system. So this is where we are promoting as well. And then the next region is Central Asia as well, where we would like to have our foot in the market as well. So it is not the countries you mentioned, but I can tell you Latin America and Caribbean is where I spend a lot of time on, and I find it very interesting. There's huge potential, actually.
No, I mean, having been in some countries of the region, I completely agree. And it's just, I'm reminded of the Trans-Siberia Express, which was a thing or is a thing, and again that's essentially through Russia, but I guess to Central Asia that there are also great opportunities to improve the rail infrastructure.
Exactly, and becoming independent of Russia.
Yeah, that makes sense. And do you travel by train whenever you can? Is that a passion? Is it a moral obligation, or is it part of your job description?
It is not yet part of my job description, but I can tell you I love traveling by train. So I love to go to my holiday destinations by train. And the last time, so it was in summer this year, it was to the south of France by train from Germany, with just one stop in Frankfurt, and it was a very convenient train ride, I have to say. It was more convenient than squeezing myself with 2 meters into any Rhine jet. So I really love it. I find it comfortable. I have the time to relax. I have the time to sleep and to think about some things and just to calm down. This is why I love trains.
Yes, I completely resonate with that. I also traveled with my sons to south of France, and we actually went from Paris, but again, from here to Paris, and then from Paris to the south of France, and it was such a pleasant experience. And well, the Wi-Fi doesn't work very well on these systems. You know, maybe that's a question I can ask you because that's ultimately infrastructure. But I guess it's not necessarily the train; it's more the mobile operators who would be held to account for that.
I have an advice for you. If the Wi-Fi doesn't work, why don't you talk to your neighbor, grab a cup of coffee or take a book?
Yes.
I mean, this is really the moment when you can
Yeah.
calm down again. And this is why I love trains, because it's really the moment. You can work, of course, but you can use the ride on the train to really relax and to calm down, which you can't for me on a flight, because I'm squeezed into these seats. And this is, for me, it's a stressful moment, whereas a train ride is a very calming moment where I can really just relax.
No, I'm with you on that. Makes perfect sense. And that actually reminds me of the whole psychology of that. And again, not necessarily of trains themselves and traveling by train, which again is a very different experience from the very moment you get on a train. It's you don't need to, for the most part, you don't need to go through the metal detector gates. There are exceptions, but typically you don't. You don't need to go there an hour or 2 hours before. Just the whole experience of it is very different. And again, traveling by train is a positive thing in and by itself. It's not a necessary evil that, oh my God, I need to get on a plane again. And it's just bad part. I want to be there. I don't want to go through the getting there. But with train, it's already a positive thing. But what I'm going towards is, again, not so much the traveling itself, but rather the benefits of connecting countries and places. Because if you think about how the low-budget airlines have contributed to European integration, and again, you can talk about carbon emissions and all the negative side effects, but the very fact of being able to move and visit and really experience the other places, I think it has radically brought the European Union, if you will, closer. And I do see trains as that connecting force. And you spoke about the rest of the world, but definitely Europe as well. So I'd be curious to hear your take on that.
I love to see this. I mean, I see slowly that we have let me say, a business segment of train services, so the classical, but we have a low-cost segment as well. And this is exactly what you talked about. So we see this in France, we see this in Belgium, in the Netherlands, as well as in Spain. And I love to see this because it's highly attractive for people to travel by train, to spend their weekend somewhere in Europe. It's a very sustainable way of traveling. I think it's a nice alternative to travel by plane for the weekend, which in terms of emissions is pretty bad. But therefore, of course, we need to build up this system actually. So we need more trains, we need the capacity in the infrastructure. We are happy to provide more trains actually for this, but it needs a long-term planning as well. So because we are not just putting something on the market, hoping that someone buys it actually. No, we would like to see this business perspective growing actually, and we would like to see that there is sufficient financing for this. So it is a big picture actually, but I think we're definitely on a good way, and we see so many good potentials. Germany is going more and more into this low-cost market for rail services, which I find extremely positive. So, and then, as I said, the first choice should be rail because it's attractive, it is cheap, it is affordable. Let's go for it. And this is what I want young people to do on their smartphone. Just use the rail app first and then click on buy instead of going to the aviation.
Yeah, and that reminds me of with the Interrail. Is it, I mean, a pass or ticket or whatever the official name is essentially you buy an all-you-can-eat ticket that you can use for say a month or similar period. And is that popular? Does that get more people into traveling, but into using trains as a means of transport?
It is very popular, and it has been popular for decades already. So I wonder which generation did not go on the Interrail trip, actually. And I would like to see actually more of this, but not only, as we said, Interrail was something for your summer vacation, let me say a couple of decades ago, where you traveled to Spain and to the south of France. It was very exciting. It was an amazing experience. Now I would like to see that it becomes your natural choice for any kind of, or that rail becomes the natural choice for any kind of movement, for your weekend trip, for your shopping trip, for whatever, your vacation, or for seeing your family, for Christmas, for Easter. That must be the natural choice. This is where I want to go to.
Yeah, that makes sense. And maybe as a closing question is, how to put that? What is your, well, dream is a big word, but we can say ambition in that you would like to reach, let's say, in the next 5 to 10 years. So where again, there's one part aspirational and one part practical, but let's stay on the aspirational part. Okay, we put a little bit the pragmatism aside and say, where would you like to see the sector in its entirety in the next 5 to 10 years?
I have a dream and I have a vision. And my dream and my vision is actually that we boost railways and that we boost railway connectivity across the European Union, that you just kind of hop on, hop off trains, because you love this mode of transport. And I would like to see actually that we shift freight from the road to rail again, actually. And that
Again?
I think it has been stronger a couple of decades ago, where rail played a more important role in terms of modal shift, and I would like to go there again. I would like to see railways being really an essential part of our daily lives, so for everybody. And I would like, as the rail supply industry, that we contribute to this vision actually with excellent products that we can deliver, and that we will continuously deliver in this respect. So I would like to see a real amazing and shiny railway system in the future. That is really my dream, because I told you that's why I started this job, and I really believe in this system.
Yeah, and maybe as a final question, or actually we have
we have the
our
cards
cards.
still.
Yes, exactly. But so a question of what would be 3 things you wish if you had a magic wand and say, okay, here are 3 difficult things, challenges. I wish I could kind of unblock these stoppers. So what would be 2 or 3 such things that you would want to resolve?
That's a wonderful question, because that's my second dream then.
Okay.
I think the first wish, or when I have this magic stick, is really that everybody is convinced we go for this approach of railways, that we're not going back and forth and we are reconsidering, but there is really a streamlined way, a strong commitment to rail actually from everybody, for society as well as the political level. This comes with let me say, the sufficient financing and funding. The second wish would be we overcome national thinking. We really strive towards this European approach. That is very important for me. And then the last thing is just, let's do it. Let's stop discussing everything endlessly for years and for decades. Let's just implement it, and let's just move on with this. I think we're discussing a little bit too much, and we're not implementing enough. And this is, for me, like, I'm getting nervous. I would say, come on, guys, roll up the sleeves. Just do it.
Yeah, I hear that from your voice, and I do get that, again, not being involved in the sector in any way, but just the little signals I'm picking up, that's what I feel, that it needs strong drive, stronger leadership, stronger commitment to actually get stuff done.
And a strong push. Yes.
Strong push, yeah. Well, first, making the decisions where there's a lot of politics and a lot of economics and a lot of engineering around it, but once there's a decision that, okay, get it done.
Exactly.
Anyways, okay. So maybe as a question of interest to many of our viewers who are based in Belgium is, how do you see the Belgian railways, Belgian system? And of course, we would always look at France because of the French rail industry and the proximity of Paris and all that. But what's your take on the development in Belgium?
I mean, here, if you allow me, I will not answer as the representative of the rail supply industry, but I will answer as Enno Wiebe, because I'm a customer of SNCB and MBS as well. And I can compare it a little bit, of course, to my home country, Germany. I am actually quite satisfied with the services SNCB and MBS offers, actually. What I see that they have invested a lot in their infrastructure. They have, so that is Infrabel, but SNCB and MBS have invested a lot in their rolling stock, for example. So I see this
rolling stock. I just
sorry,
keep
the
coming back to that expression.
This is a very typical.
Some people call them trains. Yeah,
let's call them trains. They have invested quite a lot, and I think the system is very good. I find it's a very reliable system. Yeah, perhaps it's not perfect. Perhaps you have some delays. But look, you get to Antwerp for shopping for the weekend, and we just talked about this, in 40 minutes. And when you go there for the weekend, I find the prices for this weekend ticket here incredibly cheap. I find it extremely attractive, in particular when I compare it to other systems across Europe, in particular to the United Kingdom. So I am a big fan of this system, and I think we should be a little bit more grateful as well with this system, and we should never forget as well that there are people working for our comfort 24 hours, 7 days a week, public holidays, Christmas and New Year's. So perhaps we should be a little bit more modest when we criticize everybody and everything, because I think it is quite good.
That makes sense. So with that, we have our card tradition. So I'll ask you to pick one and
I choose one.
You
is
can
all
choose
the same
any of those
questions.
and just read it out.
All right. Oh, that's funny. I thought of this before I came.
Everybody picks the card they need to pick. So
I think this is our magic box here.
Yes.
Somehow. It's about personality and emotions. Is there anything you regret not doing due to fear? It's very funny because I thought you might be asking me a question about fear.
Okay.
What are you afraid of?
So I did not, but the card did.
This is a magic box, I can tell you somehow. Yes, of course. I think it is very human to be afraid or to have fears. And of course, I do have fears as well. But I think I have learned to manage fears and actually to turn it into an opportunity in order to deal with it. And I think this is my approach, actually. To face fears, to transform it not into something positive, because that's not possible, but to deal with it and to face it and then to react to it. And this is why I would say I think there is nothing or no big decisions I have not taken or something I haven't done because of fear, because I try to turn that into an opportunity.
Can you recall an example? Any kind that you feel comfortable?
We discussed it already, and that was my move from the rail operating community to the rail supply industry. And I thought,
because you were afraid you may not.
I thought about, will I fit? Will they accept me? Will they accept my 25 years of background, my way of thinking, and my personality, for example, which of course was very much shaped by the rail operating community. And then I thought, like, okay, but if you don't try, if you don't make this step, you will never know. And then I said, you have to be courageous now. And then I said yes. And I've never.
Has it worked out well?
Let's
ask the members, but
from
your vantage point.
I think you should ask the members if that worked out well. But I want to tell you, I have never regretted the step I did.
Yeah. I think the conversation speaks to that, because you gave us a very comprehensive view of the sector, of the industry, and you answered many of my questions as a
as a train enthusiast and someone who deeply supports this means of transport, and again, not just as a private individual or tourist at times, but again, from a macroeconomic standpoint and how countries operate all the way from freight to, we spoke about military and defense and all the other aspects.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.